It's time for Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast from the Spacebook for the Fandom Podcast Network. Here we monitor the matrix of all that's ever happened or ever will across the Whoniverse, on and off screen. And I am Dan Hadley, Birmingham's king of the geeks, designated driver of your free-speaking, big-thinking show. All those incarnations of the Time Lord over 6 decades now. Whenever, wherever and however you started your journey with whichever Doctor, you'll get something out of each and every trip with Type 40. And it's back to the future's past and the push button 80s to mark yet another Doctor Who anniversary on this edition of the podcast. And just to make sure everything's running smoothly, I've got Antony Wayner here on standby too. We're a bit like the Dukes of Hazzard, aren't we? Do you remember that show?
I do remember that show. Oh my goodness gracious. Back in the day, you always managed to extract, Dan, some old television reference and you kind of keep me on my toes. I think last week, what were we talking about? Space 1999 and oh my goodness, programs from yesteryear. I was just reading online, and I know we don't want to talk about missing episodes this evening, but, you know, lots of speculation about old television returning from its missing domains. And, you know, just thinking about the Avengers and Adam Adamant and Dukes of Hazzard and all of Blake Seven, all of those programs, those vintage programs that we all love and watch.
Do you remember that thing the Dukes of Hazzard used to do where they would go sliding across the bonnet of the car? I wouldn't like to try that with this TARDIS console. You're bound to, I think, snag your nads on one of those sharp angles. Not nice. They didn't think that design through, I don't think, Antony.
Oh, gosh. Do you remember this, though? Because you're a Davison fan, right, Dan? So
yes.
This must have been really exciting because for the 5 Doctors, this was a redesigned TARDIS interior. So it must have been really exciting for you, I guess. Not so much for me, I don't recall. But was this a big thing for you when a new TARDIS interior was revealed?
Big. It was huge. It was a massive deal. It was the show, part of the show, really leveling up in a way that I think I didn't know that I wanted the show to. At a time where people were starting to be unkind to it in the wake of the Star Wars trilogy, and this just looked just that little bit more Star Wars for me. So I was all about this.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, it looks great, and it survived, correct me if I'm wrong, survived right up until the last days of the series in 1989. But do you remember there was that time in Battlefield where the roundels almost didn't exist anymore, perished, and they kind of had that brown backdrop, didn't they? And that console looked really good in that kind of dimmer lighting of Battlefield and all of those times.
Well, I didn't know for years that they'd sort of struck half the set and that was done to cover all of these various sins that have been committed on the legacy of Doctor Who. And you could say that is part of the mystique and the illusion and therefore the magic of filmmaking, couldn't you?
Yeah, I was going to say, Dan, it's confusing, isn't it, for a viewer? Because in the black and white days, there was various photographic, backdrops for the TARDIS interior, and you didn't quite know where you were looking, which I suppose is the magic of television and that mystery of the TARDIS interior. When that first Davison console was revealed, we saw lots of it, and a lot of times there was lots of preamble in the TARDIS, wasn't there, before a story started?
If we're talking about the magic of television and of filmmaking, I can't think of anyone better than our guest on this edition of the show to come and talk about it and maybe take away some of the mystique to some degree, maybe spill a few secrets if we can coax it out of him. He's somewhat of a man of action, so speeding trains, tight corners, yetis and devil seeds, he's done it all. Yes, it's a welcome return trip after too long for filmmaker, producer, and director, Mr. Keith Barnfather. Welcome back, Keith.
I'm busy at the moment. I'm reading a book. It's a very good book, but it's ran the wrong way. Spooky.
Master self-publicist and probably never off duty and probably the most resourceful person working in the Doctor Who universe, I feel. Keith, it's great to see you again. Welcome back.
Well, actually, I'd rather finish the conversation now because it can only go worse. I mean, after that accolade, maybe I should just go home. Oh, I am home. Okay. That's a very nice build-up. I don't honestly think I deserve it, but I am very grateful. Compliments are always welcome.
You don't deserve it. You don't deserve it when you're here to mark 4 decades of Reeltime Pictures, that production company that you've started that's made hundreds of films and documentaries, hasn't it? Keith, this has to be something worth sticking around for.
Well, I mean, I don't think when you start, you don't sort of think, wow, I'm going to run this company for, the rest of my life virtually and build up a huge legacy, you don't. You sort of think, I hope I can feed myself next week because I've just left a very good job and I really don't know how things are going to go. And I know it's, to sit here and say, it's the people that I've worked with that have made me a success. Just sounds like the classic thing that people do say. Yeah. But I really do mean that. I mean, if I have a talent, it's being able to know the right people to ask to work with me, and also being very lucky that they're stupid enough to do it. Yeah. Well, that's not the
some people have to learn the hard way, Keith.
They do, and then they find out.
Short memories.
Yes, how depressing it can be. Yeah, no, I mean, I know, I am obviously very proud of the fact that we've made 40 years. I mean, most production companies don't last that long. So to survive 40 years and to be successful in both the cult television line and also the general line, which made the money, which was the corporate business and broadcast television and films for film festivals and stuff. I'm what can I say? You have to be proud of it. I just don't want it to go to your head because you're only as good as the last thing you did.
A great deal of it, I realise, has its roots, doesn't it, in your lifelong love of Doctor Who too. We're going to talk about a great deal of that and the various people that you have worked with, including this guy in the foreground here. Looks somewhat familiar. So this is from an upcoming project where the two of you have sort of teamed up with another friend of the show, isn't it?
Are you asking me? Well, I mean, I couldn't possibly reveal who we're talking about, but he isn't very far away.
Look at that distinguished gentleman in that picture. I think that is me, Dan.
So it is.
Who knew? I have to say, Keith and Dan, it was a real honour to not only interview Ian Levine because he's a big Doctor Who figure in Doctor Who fandom, but it was my first opportunity to present the Mythmaker. I'd featured on a couple of Mythmakers previously, but as you'll grow to understand during this conversation, I own every single Mythmaker from the VHS sign to the DVD. So this was a real honour. And I'm not just saying that because Keith sat there and he's my boss for this particular project, but it was a real pleasure, Keith, and it was a delight to do. Be fair.
If you feel that way, Antony, you must remember that it is not Mythmaker, it is Mythmakers.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. It's always Mythmakers, singular or plural.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Plural. There's hundreds of these now, isn't there?
Yeah, 185 released with another 5 in the can. Yeah.
First of many teases, I don't doubt, here on this edition of the show. More teasing, more stupid jokes, and maybe the pearl of wisdom coming up too, if you stick around. That's after I remind you, of course, if you'd like to do some real lifetime traveling of your own, each and every edition of Type 40, past, present, and future, is just a tap or two away on the device of your choice, providing you know precisely where to look. There's a proper cavalcade of reviews, previews, interviews, geek outs, and deep dives with all our regular panelists and lots more awesome guests too. Something for every fan, in fact, over at type40.podbean.com. More about that a little later on. And we'll be bending the laws of time just a little to plug our sister and brother, cousins, and other podcasts all across the fabulous Fandom Podcast Network too. So there's...
No one out there is going to know that we basically made a complete cock-up of it, but you cut it brilliantly.
There you go. Yeah, we'll save that for the outtakes. There's lots to catch up on, plenty to recap, a really big anniversary all coming up right now. 1984 was quite the year. It was the year Band-Aid was formed, the first Apple Mac hit the shops. There was tripping at the Olympics and busting in the cinema. The Doctor, well, he seemed more confused than ever in the wake of yet another regeneration. Amidst all of this, that May, an upstart independent video production company, Reeltime Pictures, released Myth Makers 1, beginning a range of interviews with the stars and makers of Doctor Who that's still running today. Now, in celebration of Reeltime's 40th birthday year, a detailed account of its history has been published, titled Myths and Legends, the Reeltime Pictures story, whilst up in Northumberland at Hexham, a special event was staged where further interviews were recorded, surrounded by props and costumes from the series itself, and an audience of well-wishers and convention goers. Keith, this is all very respectable. Isn't it very organised? It's almost like you're part of the furniture. Are you enjoying all of this attention that you're receiving?
Oh, God. That's a bit of an awkward question. I mean, we all love to be loved. That almost sounds like Tom Baker. But I adore. Anyway, yeah, it's obviously nice when you're recognised for what what you've done. I won't say what you've achieved because it sounds like it's self-seeking then, but it is lovely when people sort of tell you that that what you've done over the years has meant something to them. That's probably one of the main reasons that I've carried on for so long making the productions that I have, because I've always had lovely feedback from people. And I think always keep these things in perspective, though, because I mean, the moment you start believing your own publicity, I think it's the time you really need to hang up your production company, because you then start becoming the person you don't want to be. I mean, I'm as happy sitting down in an audience with a bunch of fans all down the pub that as much as I am being on stage when people want me to talk. And I hope I'm always like that,
Well, you certainly have been in the various times now that I've bumped into you going here and there in various corridors. Usually you're carrying either a cup of coffee or a camera, sometimes both. We stop, we shake hands, we both go off in opposite directions. But you were exactly as I thought you'd be, sort of on the balls of your feet, full of energy. It seems like you've got a few different things going on behind your eyes, including how long I've got to talk to this guy for before I can get where I am.
It's always, yeah. It's always the same. I mean, you're right. I'm always constantly apologizing as I'm rushing around whenever I'm at an event, because I'm nearly always working. So I'm always, I have no time to stand and stare most of the time at events.
Is that the real fuel of Reeltime Pictures, now marking its 40th birthday? Is that what really powers the entire effort?
In what way do you mean? I'm sorry, I'm not being clever.
Well, I was thinking your exuberance, your enthusiasm for whatever it is, whatever the subject is that you have to really feel it and sort of bring it up to engage with it, to communicate whatever you need your film to communicate to the viewer.
I think, I mean, when it's a small company, when it's one person, two people, three people running it, I would even say with companies even as relatively big as Bad Wolf, you do need to be the person that leads from the front. You always have to carry everybody with you, otherwise there's a vacuum. And I think that's true of any business. Whoever runs the business needs to carry it, because if they don't, you can't rely on other people to do it. And especially when it is such a small business, when it is just myself and usually Anastasia, and then freelance people who come in to help. You are the focal point for everything. So you have to be the kind of person that leads. It's almost a necessity. If you sit back, things don't get done, and in our business, that's death.
Doctor Who is a very serious business, isn't it, gentlemen? Okay, maybe not. But you have made this a sort of a parallel life's work. When you look back to Mythmakers 1 and that simple concept that you had, simply to sit down with an actor and to have a chat with them for a little while, a tiny acorn that all of this has grown from. I mean, would you possibly have imagined that you'd still be recording these and you've got 5 more in the can?
No, of course not. I think, I think anybody would be honest and say, when I started, it was just managing to get enough money together in parallel to the work that I was doing at the time, which was the corporate and business television that was bringing in the money. I was putting money aside to do this, and I was working on a very small budget. Just getting the first ones made was the only thing I was thinking of. And I wasn't very happy with the duplication on the first few, because the tapes that I bought were, I don't know whether people would remember, but in the early days of VHS, you used to be able to buy tape in bulk, cut to the length you wanted, rather than a big manufacturer who charged a lot more for each VHS tape. You could buy them from companies that cut the tape themselves. So if you wanted a 30-minute tape, they'd cut the tapes off big reels and produce them themselves, which was cheaper. But I was very unhappy with the actual quality of the tapes I was getting. And I even remember going around to see Jan Vincent Rudkin, Stephen Payne with the very first Mythmakers, played them the VHS, which I kept seeing all these dropouts on in my eye. And they hardly noticed it, and it wasn't a problem for them. But it was very much, editing. I literally had one day in an edit suite in central London that I hired, a U-matic edit suite, to do the editing. I couldn't afford any more than that day, so I had to get it done. And that's what it was like for the first half dozen or so, I'd say. I was, it was hand to mouth. It was not thinking, I'm building this catalog, it's going to be wonderful, it will go on forever. It was just to keep going. It was only, I think perhaps once I'd got up to, say, John Pertwee's Mythmakers at 15, that I started to think, oh, okay, yeah, we've got something here that will last. And I think I can make this carry on.
Refining your own techniques as well as growing relationships.
Yeah, you learn. And of course, the big difference was, in those days, I couldn't afford kit, because kit in those days was only U-matic right at the beginning. And a U-matic camera and recorder and microphones and lighting, you're talking in those days of something like about 10, 12, 15,000 in those days. So there's no way I could have afforded that. Whereas when we moved into DV, which was the big breakthrough, digital video mini DV tapes, the cameras were so much better. The kit cost so much less. You could buy all the kit you wanted for £2,000-3,000, and I could afford that. So that liberated us to be able to shoot our own material. It's things like that. The world has changed. Now everybody can shoot something, and that's fine. That's just progress.
Mythmakers is the line of releases you're most synonymous with, I know, and the simple idea was long-ish form interviews, wasn't it? Reeltime was doing this decades before Matthew Sweet and BBC Studios would do it on the Blu-rays, or before Inside the Actor Studio, that show on American cable TV with James Lipton, if you remember that. I mean, Antony, from my point of view as a fan, I remember this range being launched, and I didn't really, because I was like a school kid, I was still at primary school. So I started seeing adverts appear in Doctor Who magazine for these videotapes. I knew it was something to do with videos. And there were big headlines featuring the names and likenesses of actors that I recognized from Doctor Who. I couldn't quite figure out how I could convince my mum to let me have the money to send off so I could get on board with the Mythmakers, early on. So I was shut out of this for a little while. I had to play catch up later. But do you remember this range launching?
Yeah, I do. And it was exciting because, like Keith has said, this was new ground, the opportunity to listen to Doctor Who actors, producers, script writers talking about their time on the program. Context is so important here. So, in the years and the decades of the Blu-ray box set, this was the forefather of all of that, being able to sit down and put a tape in and listen to an actor or someone talking about their time on Doctor Who. So this is trailblazing for somebody who was, I was 13, 14 years old. I hadn't gone to a convention at that time. I'd gone to a small one in Bath, but not seeing the type of actors that Keith was presenting on the Mythmakers. So being able to watch a tape and listen to reminiscing about Doctor Who in your own home was, it shouldn't be underestimated. And I think, in that YouTube Blu-ray collection world that we live in, those things are taken for granted. You can hear about anybody talking about anything at any time. But this was the moment where you could engage with Doctor Who actors and scriptwriters and producers at the same time. And Keith, I actually remember going into CT, the Doctor Who Appreciation Society newsletter, and cutting out that coupon. So when you showed it there with Nick Corley, there was me diligently cutting out this coupon because, as I said at the moment ago, I've got all of these releases and I got them right from day one. So I've always been a huge supporter of the Mythmakers and Keith's work, but because it was giving me insight into the worlds of Doctor Who. So by the time you got to people, your picture shows there, like Karen Ann Ford, Nicola Bryant, Wendy Padbury, it was giving you insight into episodes of Doctor Who that I'd never seen before.
I mean, it's very difficult for those of your viewers who are younger it is very difficult to appreciate that, back in the early days of BBC VHS, they didn't release anything other than the episodes. I can't say when they started adding behind the scenes, but I know it was probably into the mid to late 90s, maybe early 80s, mid 80s.
Probably. They experimented a little bit with sort of dropping them here and there on very selected VHS releases, but I think it was a handful at most.
There were the years tapes that John Nathan Turner did, of course, and then I think it was the documentary that was made by an American PBS station that was included on the Cyberman story that was one of the first where they put a making of. But essentially, you didn't get to meet the actors and the actresses unless you went to a convention. And for many people, that wasn't possible. I mean, one of my major reasons for doing the series to start it was that whole point that this would be something that would be unique, would be different, would allow fans who couldn't travel to conventions, because in those days there weren't that many conventions around. In the 80s, yeah, sure, the DWAS conventions were there, and there were a few other big ones, but there wasn't the plethora of signings and conventions and Comic-Cons and things that we have today. It's almost impossible today to go 1 week without an event with some kind of Doctor Who connection going on. But in those days, that wasn't the case. So we had a product that I think was, as Antony said, was unique and certainly for many years was groundbreaking. I mean, it's groundbreaking now, but not in the same way. We're not making something totally unique, which is one of the reasons why I'm not pursuing Mythmakers into New Who, because there is so much out there of the actors and actresses from New Who being interviewed for behind the scenes production. So it wouldn't be quite so unique. Doesn't mean we won't do them, but I'm not actively pursuing it as much as I would have done with Classic Who.
I can see what you mean. That does make perfect sense. And I think it's kind of in line with the brand too, as well. It does feel very organic for something which I know has got to sustain itself. It's got to be commercially viable. The people that you speak to in the various waves that you release them, I don't know, one seems to make sense after another, and there are some personalities, some professionals you seem to have managed to have coaxed back to the Doctor Who family after decades away, which I would imagine would be partly down to your back catalogue, your own professional standing as well. It would all play a part, I suppose, in getting people, because not everybody is a natural speaker in the way that the three of us are they? Some people are just a little bit reluctant, but if you convince them that what they've got to say, other people would really like to hear, and that they're among friends, and bung them a few quid, a bit of bus fare, everybody wins, don't they?
It's rarely the money. Most people Anybody who is reticent to either go back to something that they did in the past, or just basically are not people who enjoy being in front of a camera, you're not going to be able to persuade them with money. It takes time and getting to know you and basically badgering them into doing it. I've had many conversations with Sophie Aldred over the years about how I plan what I do. Yes, of course I do. I'm always planning. But at the same time, I think a lot of the way that Reeltime has gone has been totally organic. I think it's a good word that you used. I think we, I just have always kept my mind open, I suppose, to potential projects. And whenever anything has come along that feels right, I've followed my gut instinct and done that. And that does seem to have proved right. But I mean, we've moved around a bit. We've ducked and dived and wheeled and dealed a little bit into different bits, different processes. Some have worked, some spin-off myth makers things to other programs. None of them have been a disaster, but they've not worked as well. So we just skipped back and gone back into Doctor Who. I mean, for example, even making Sil, that wasn't the next project I had planned at the time, but it just, because I was interviewing Nabil, because we needed Nabil for the Doctor's tapes, the Doctor's DVD compilations we were doing, which I just needed more actors to fill up one particular production, one double DVD. I approached Nabil, and when I interviewed Nabil, that just somehow led to doing Sil. I think I've learned not to fight. Yeah, not to fight against where I'm being taken. I think too many of us believe we have a route to follow and we stick to it. I don't think that's a good way to live your life. I think you need to always follow the wind. Does that make sense? Whenever you feel something is a way to go, the way you're being pushed, don't fight it, because normally it's the right way to go.
And it seems to me that you do attract people who are kind of fellow travelers, who just get it, who encourage you, and I would imagine emotionally support you too, and who seem to be having as much fun as you do. I mean, you mentioned Sophie a moment ago, Sophie Aldred. She has to be one of your longest standing familiars, I would say. Several productions she's been a part of yours in various different capacities. And we never know quite where she's going to turn up next.
So, Sophie and I, I do not use the word friend lightly. I never have. I've got many acquaintances, and I have some very good friends. And Sophie, I count as a friend, and I think I can say that. I think she would agree. We are very good friends, and I respect her immensely as a professional and as a person. So it's always a joy when I can sort of come along with a reason why I want to use her. She would never want me to pick her to do something just because it's her. She would not want that. So when I know something is coming along where she's the right person, or in fact, sometimes when she comes to me and says this, that, and the other, I know I can do it. I will always work with her. I mean, when we did one of the things you're saying about the way things progress, I hadn't really ever intended starting doing archiving of other people's work, but somehow over the last couple of years that's happened. I think the first thing was when I remembered through conversation with somebody else about a documentary called Who is Tom Baker Unauthorized, that was released back in the 80s in a cash-in terrible video, which just disappeared. And I thought, well, this is terrible. I mean, if this is gone, it's sad, because it does have some merit. There are things in it, I wouldn't want to see it lost forever. And I tracked down the production company, found out they'd gone out of business, found out all the masters were destroyed. And it was either a question of probably letting it, apart from really crappy VHS copies and copies of VHS copies, falling into the abyss. I basically put the effort into finding the presenter, finding out what had happened, getting four VHS copies and getting them to our production duplication facilities person, David Palfreyman, who I would always recommend to anybody, to telemedia, if you ever need anything transferred. And he bumped them all up to HD. And our colorist went through all 4 of them, playing them all, picking the best bits. Where there was a bit of every bad dropout, she'd go to a different tape and rebuilt the whole thing in HD. And that would have been lost to time if that hadn't been done. And that just led to that led to Reverse the Polarity, that led to Star Watch, that led to Saffron. And in Saffron's case, although it's not a direct Doctor Who related or science fiction spin-off, because Sophie was involved in it, and Sophie suggested to me, could we do something about it to save it? I contacted Paul Thomas, who was the creator, and he still had his 16mm prints and negs, but he didn't have the money to be able to get them all transferred. So again, I got involved, and we remastered them all, digitized them all, put them up to HD, and put those in the archive with Paul's blessing. And I've really enjoyed doing that. I've really enjoyed finding work that other people have done that might, essentially in the end get lost because it's gone in their loft. They've not got the ability to go back to it and remaster it all, whereas I do, and I can, and I think that's a very worthwhile thing to do.
I agree. It's as if these productions are finding the place that they truly belong, Antony.
I do agree. And just listening to Keith talking about the extent of the project. So we had the individual myth makers, the one actor or one script editor producer editions. And then subsequently we've gone on to documentaries. And Keith, hearing Keith, you talk about things like Star Watch. I really enjoyed that particular production because it was insightful, because the original video promotion for Star Watch with John Pertwee was presented on the DVD, but you were able to hear about those experiences of trying to get that off the ground. And I have to say, Keith, I'd say this if you weren't here, the last 10, 15 real-time productions have been really insightful. Like Steve Camden, for example, talking about, operating K9, stories that I hadn't heard before. And, Dan, we've heard a lot of Doctor Who stories. So to still be capturing that newness, if you like, of that information has been really great as a Doctor Who fan. I've really enjoyed it, Keith.
That was another, that was another consideration at the moment. There's always been a problem for anybody who started as a fan and then became part of the actual production of the program. I don't want to talk about negative things, but I'm sure everybody out there knows that there is and can be sometimes an element of jealousy with fans that another fan has made it. And there's always that thing of you always looking at a pecking order thing in fandom, which upsets me a lot, and I don't like to see it. And people like Mark Ayres, I think, would suffered from that, because he was a fan before he worked on the program. There's an element of negativity sometimes with Mark, which is very unfair. Stephen Camden went through a lot of that when he worked on the program and came to conventions. There was an element of negativity against him because, he's made it. To a degree also, you could say for Matthew Waterhouse, because he was a fan who became, if he hadn't have been a fan, I don't think he would have had the same kind of negativity played against him, But again, I think a lot of it is unconscious negativity. You don't necessarily realize you're being negative because there's an element of jealousy or envy. And I think that's true of all human beings, not Doctor Who fans, but unfortunately we do have an element of that. And I wanted to try and, in the last, again, it's a lot about legacy, the way I think, and I wanted to give the fans who've made it as professionals a voice and recognition. So Stephen Camden, Kevin John Davis, Ian, although he was more working on the program, and there will be others, and going out peripherally a little bit to my central thing was always with Mythmakers, you had to have worked on the program, but I have broken that now. I have made a conscious decision to say, if you've made a worthwhile contribution to the Doctor Who universe, then that you have a right or a place in Mythmakers, because it's holistic, it's viewing everything, which is why well, I did my Mythmakers not because not because I wanted to, but there's so many people get nagging me to do it. And also, we're doing David Howe's this week. He's doing his book. He's launching his book at Waterstones in Doncaster this week. I can't go, but I've got Steve Broster, bless him, to go up and film that, and that will be a Mythmakers going out later in the year. So I think it's right and proper. I sometimes feel the weight, and again, this sounds a bit self-seeking and a bit arrogant, but I do feel the weight of trying to balance it out so that nobody thinks I'm pandering to individual friends or trying to make political points of my own. I'm not. I am trying to balance everything, and of course everybody's going to have an opinion. Some people are going to say, well, you shouldn't have interviewed that person, you should have done that person, they've done more for Doctor Who than that person has. But I can only do what I think is best and what I think works for me and works for Mythmakers. And I'm very grateful that people generally follow me on that and accept that I'm doing the best I can.
Keith, I really enjoyed your Mythmaker, and it was really humble, actually. I didn't expect it to be any different, but I really enjoyed it, and there was so much I wanted to ask you. So maybe later on we can get that opportunity, because I don't want to retrundle the ground of your Mythmaker, because I feel that's a bit unfair. I think that's your story to tell about, maybe which is the favourite Mythmaker, which is Mythmakers, which is your favourite spin-off, all of that. I think that's your Mythmaker.
Yeah. I'll go and get another glass of wine, but yeah, we can keep going.
There's just a couple of things, from your Mythmaker. I mean, you've done so much, Keith. The first ever convention. I mean, there is that is just exciting to talk about in its, on its own merit, and you capture that some in Reeltime Pictures productions around that. Before
we move on from the Mythmakers,
is it our sponsor's message?
No, not yet.
Oh,
we've got in a little while. Before we move on from the Mythmakers, I do feel that it could be a crucial point where, if there is anybody out there who somehow over the last 40 years has never seen one and wonders what it is we're talking about, we can give them a sort of an idea of the flavour of Mythmakers, of your brand of covering the Doctor Who universe, the people from behind the camera and on the screen too, very much the Reeltime Pictures way. So check it out. You've seen this before, Keith, so you'll know.
This is Mythmakers. My boot's got a hole in it, and we are, in fact, about here, which was the location for the Doctor Who story Battlefield, and we're here to interview...
me. Hello, my name's Sylvester McCoy, and yes, it is a bit runny. There we are.
Thank you. And this is Mythmakers, and we'll be chatting to him. Cue the starting sequence.
Here you are.
Thank you. Right, you just press play. And there we go.
Oh, I thought I might have my...
That's the starting sequence. Yes, there it is. Can you see anything there? Can't see a thing. Right, well, scrap the starting sequence. Thank you very much.
That was a very good start.
And please take this as well. Thank you. Right, well, let's make a start. No, I know. So how did you get here?
That sort of says it all, doesn't it? That playfulness leading through to an absorbing interview.
That was a rare one, because it was intended to be completely shot in an hour live with no breaks. But of course, in live television, it never works that way, or shall we say as live. Obviously, it wasn't being shown live. I wish it could have been, but that technology didn't exist then. And we had problems. We had a few breakdowns during the time we were doing it. But also, Sylvester is the kind of person that thrives in that kind of environment. And I thought it would be the ideal vehicle for him. I don't think it's the Mythmakers I'm not proud of, but there are ones I'm obviously very proud of, and I think are really a revealing and incredibly good documentaries, especially for the money that we could afford to spend on them. And Sylvester's Mythmakers, I think, is a diamond. I think it's really good.
we're not going to probe you for any favourites, just as Antony's said. But I am aware that depending on certainly the ones that I've seen, and I'm by no means the completist that Antony is, don't get me wrong, but there are several of these that I've seen over and over and over again. And in some respects, I think you always played with the format just enough that it retained that kind of house style, I suppose, and the feeling that we were watching a quality production, whatever was going on, but that it was always going to be fun to one degree or another, creative and fun.
I think, I mean, obviously we over the years, we've had to develop a house style that, you know, you can't afford to go on location and all the time. But it also is a question of sometimes the person you're interviewing, there isn't a location that would make any sense, or they are of an age that it wouldn't be, or a personality that they don't want to go out and walk around somewhere, you know, and you get the people that really love that idea. And then sometimes you get circumstances where you intend to go out and do loads of walking around and you find the radio mics won't work. Because you're in some kind of dead spot for radio mics, which happened with Peter Purves. And we basically shot the whole thing around his home, whereas we hoped to walk around his village and do a big walkie-talkie. So you just can never tell. You know, Nick Briggs is obviously during the first 2/3, if not 3/4 of Mythmakers, was absolutely crucial to making it a success. I mean, the legacy, the success of Mythmakers in the last, say, quarter or third of the time that other people have been working on it is entirely due to the groundwork that he put down. And that's what I was saying about how oddly it's following the way that things just take you, you know, meetings. I knew I needed to have somebody presenting Mythmakers who understood Doctor Who and science fiction. The first 2 Mythmakers were hosted by a very good professional interviewer called Keith Harrison, who I met at Channel 4. But I realized that, you know, he just didn't have the knowledge to be able to present them the way that I wanted them presented, by somebody who knew what they was talking about, knew about the program, and could tease answers from people because he or she knew that. And then literally 3 weeks after we, you know, I'd sort of been trying to think, how the hell am I ever going to meet anybody who could do this job? I met Nick at a convention down in Southampton, and I just went, that's the guy. He's the one. And thank God he agreed, you know, and there's a lifelong friendship, and we're meeting for a curry on Friday.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it as well. Robert Dick has been your most regular interview of late, hasn't he? But I know that Sophie conducts a lot of interviews too. And of course, Antony here as well. So it's the same but different. A different brand of conversation, I would imagine, comes with each interviewer and interviewee.
It was difficult. I mean, we got to a point, Nick and I, where every Mythmakers, essentially, because Big Finish was taking more and more and more of his time, we got to a point where every Mythmakers, for about 15, 20 Mythmakers, was him sitting at a computer linking interview that I'd shot. And we had one of those conversations over a curry where I just had to say to him, I really need to use at this point I was thinking somebody else. And, you know, it was tough. He said, you know, he felt very proprietary about it. You know, he'd been the only presenter for 150 Mythmakers or something. But that's the sign of a real friendship and a true human being, which Nick is. And he knew that I wasn't saying it to upset him. I was saying it because of purely, totally practical reasons and for the success of the series. You know, we were getting into a stagnation because we were making them too similar. I needed to get out on location again with somebody, and Nick just couldn't spare specific times when I could fit the productions in. So that's what it was Nick's suggestion to ask Robert about doing Matthew Waterhouse's Mythmakers, because he knew they were good friends. And the funny perverse thing about it was Robert lives around the corner from me, and I didn't know. He's like 400 yards, 500 yards away.
Bates intervenes. It's again in the story of Reeltime Pictures. And you've moved with the times as well. I notice in that, obviously, VHS. Well, first Betamax. You were on Betamax as well for a little while,
Yeah,
weren't you?
For a
And then,
couple of issues, we did it Betamax and VHS, but I dropped it pretty quickly.
and you embraced the DVD age too, didn't you? All in good time. But you've revised the line sensitively as home video has evolved, I feel. As a consumer, that's what I thought. Whatever stage at my life I was in and whatever disposable income I'd got, there was, I'd go and look wherever you'd buy these things, access these things, and there is Mythmakers. There's Reeltime Pictures, whether it be through mail order or at Time Travel TV or your own platform, in effect.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you move with the times. I mean, having said that, I still get people sort of coming up to me at a convention or emailing me, whatever, and saying they have never heard of it before. They've never heard of Reeltime. They've never heard of Mythmakers. So it's a good grounder. It's a good grounder. It's a good thing that happens to you, that you don't start, again, believing your own publicity. You know, everybody knows me. Well, they don't. I hope everybody watching this has some idea who I am, and I'm sorry if you're bored to tears. I'm doing my best.
I was going to say, Dan and Keith, I remember going into Forbidden Planet in London in all its various locations. And so I stopped buying Mythmakers via mail order and keeping it as a kind of treat weekend to go to London to Forbidden Planet and then pick up a whole pile of tapes. You know, what were the latest releases? And I used to sort of wait for a couple of releases to go up and then trip to London, Forbidden Planet, and you'd come up with these goodies. It was a real event buy. You know, a new Mythmakers was kind of quite exciting. Who were they going to do next? Who was going to be the person that they were going to interview next? So that was always quite exciting, I think.
Anthony, I used to do exactly the same thing, Keith. I used to go into town, into Birmingham city centre. Nostalgia and Comics is where I used to pick them up from, 2 or 3 at a time, and you take them back, and that was me set up for 3 or 4 weeks, something like that.
You know, it's funny. You know, for me, it's very difficult to. You're giving me a window on something that I simply have no idea of, because I've always been the person on the other side. So, you know, as you say, I organised the first first 2 Doctor Who conventions. So I knew, all I've ever known in Doctor Who conventions is being behind the scenes. I don't know what it's like to attend a Doctor Who convention as an attendee. I never ever do that. I always am there either because people have asked me to go to do something, or I'm selling. So my life experience is completely different. And it's really fascinating to hear when somebody, I pray that there's no one who would ever say that they've come up to me at a convention and sort of said, oh, you know, I've watched, I bought all your whatever, and I've still gone, yeah, right, thanks, and walked away, because I really enjoy talking to people about their view of not my life, but of the product and of what we've done as a company, because I can't see their point of view. I can't see your point of view. You know, and Anthony, you'll have that problem soon because you're on the inside now. I mean, you're not going to be rushing down. You're not going to be rushing online trying to buy Ian Levine's Mythmakers, are you?
No.
So how does it feel, given what you've just said, how you've just accounted your experience of our experience? How did the book come about? Now, this is written by Dylan Reese, a friend of the show. Dylan, I know Dylan. It's Doctor Who Myths and Legends, the Reeltime Pictures story. When someone, I mean, did you approach Dylan, or did Dylan approach you? And how involved have you been with this book? Is the existence of a book about your contribution to Doctor Who in this sort of unofficial way, is the existence of this book something that you couldn't possibly have imagined? And again, going back through it there, you know, you plugged it at the start there. Has that offered you a window that you wouldn't have otherwise got?
Well, I mean, when I wrote my introduction to it, because David Howard, the publisher, asked me if I could do an intro. You know, you can't sort of say, when I suggested we did this book, because that sounds terribly arrogant. I think it came from Dylan had already written a book about the wilderness years, and he contacted me about that when he was doing that book. And he kindly sent me a copy of it when that was published, which I enjoyed reading. And because Reeltime was coming up to its 40th anniversary, I started thinking it would be really nice if somebody could do, I certainly didn't think of self-publishing something like that. I wanted an objective view from outside. So I started thinking, oh, wouldn't it be nice if a book could be done? And Dylan and I talk quite regularly, we're good mates. He's worked on some of the productions that I've done. And I think I wouldn't like to say who suggested it. I think it was me. I said, if anybody was going to write a book about Reeltime, it would be you. And he went, oh, I don't know if I've got time to do something like that. And then a bit later, he came back to me and said, actually, if you're going to do it, I would love to write it. And I said, well, I wouldn't do it. I'm not a publisher, but I don't know, maybe David Howard. Obviously, David's another great friend. We've known each other nearly 50. Christ, I've known so many people so long. And I think I contacted David and said, would Telos be interested? And I wouldn't say he bit my hand off, but it was like, yes, and that's how it started. And after that, I was sort of out of the loop in a way. Dylan obviously interviewed me a lot, but he and I were both very careful that it was his book. He was the creator. He was doing the writing. I didn't see it until it was finished, and I just proofread it. And the only thing I did was comment on factual errors that I could see. I didn't want to be an editor of my own or Reeltime's book. And he and David did most of the prep work, and I just provided any information and illustrations that they wanted. One of the things that made me smile not long ago, I was sitting at the computer working on something, and I had this proof copy, which I've got here, and I actually referred to it. And I thought, it's a bit ironic that I'm referring to a book that somebody else has written about Reeltime that I needed a fact from. But in fact, what Dylan's done for me and David's done for me is it's almost like how many of us get the chance to have somebody look at your life for you and put it into context. And that's what this is. This for me is obviously it's not my entire life. I did have one outside of it, a private one. My wife, my child, my family. We've
got to wait a little while for that, have we? For the
tell-all. Dylan's on it now. But it's wonderful to have something like this written by somebody, putting it all into context and giving you timelines and narratives. And I'm not David Howe. David Howe writes. My wife does as well, actually. Anastasia. They both write their lives in a diary every day. I don't. I've never been able to. I've never had the patience. And I remember doing Mythmakers and talking to production people, and sort of they're going, oh, I don't really remember much about this, that. And I'm going, God almighty, it's Doctor Who. You should know everything about what you did. And of course, I'm as bad as them because I'm human like everybody else. It's a job. I didn't think 30, 40 years ago anybody would give a toss what I did when I did Mythmakers 5 or where we were or what date it was. I was just getting the damn things made. But now you look back and you go, oh, but I'd really like to have known where we were when we did that.
It must be so strange, hasn't it?
It is. It is. It's a huge privilege. And humbling is a word it's difficult to use because, it sounds so insincere. But yeah, it's really humbling that anybody thinks my life is worth a book, and such a good book. I think Dylan has done an incredible job on it. I love it. I think he's written it intelligently, cleverly, and made me look like I knew what I was doing.
The wonder of words, magic words.
Magic. It's a kind of magic,
There'll be links in the description and the show notes to where you can get your copy of Myths and Legends, the Reeltime Pictures story. Of course there will, but this is an ideal time for us to slip a couple of grooves in time. I know Hold on tight. We'll be back before you know it. There's just enough time here for Kev to fill you in about all the other great conversations going on across the Fandom Podcast Network on all those other shows. Stay right where you are. There's so much more to tell about 40 years of real-time pictures with Keith here. We'll be back in a couple of minutes.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. Here are the other great shows on the Fandom Podcast Network. Culture Clash, where we discuss the latest in entertainment and pop culture. Blood of Kings, our show covering the entire Highlander universe. Couch Potato Theater, we celebrate our favorite movies. And Time Warp, our Fandom Flashback show discussing a year in movies and our favorite retro movie, TV, and pop culture topics. Good Evening, discussing all things Alfred Hitchcock. Hair Metal Podcast, we cover the rock metal music of the 80s and early 90s. Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast, discussing the time-traveling Doctor Who universe. Lethal Mullet, an action film podcast covering the 80s, 90s, and beyond. Also, check out the Lethal Mullet Network for more great podcasts. What a Piece of Junk, our Star Wars podcast. Making Treks, a Star Trek podcast with a deep dive into the final frontier. The Fandom Show, our Fandom Podcast Network live YouTube show discussing the hottest topics in fandom. The True Believers MCU podcast, discussing the Marvel Cinematic and Television Universe. Union Federation, our Star Trek and the Orville show. And we're proud to welcome the BQN Network to the Fandom Podcast Network. Please visit our friends on the BQN Network, a Star Trek Universe podcast that also includes your favorite topics, movies, history, superheroes, and more. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on YouTube. The Fandom Podcast Network is also on all major podcast platforms. The Fandom Podcast Network audio master feed is on Podbean at fpnet.podbean.com. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.
And you can treat yourself or treat your other selves to a little something from a selection of merchandise over at the Fandom Podcast Network's TeePublic store. There's a link to all of that in the show notes. It all goes right back into supporting the network in its continuing mission to keep you topped up with the very best in geeky pop culture coverage, so everybody wins. I'm back here with Antony and Keith, checking in with Reeltime Pictures as it's enjoying a Ruby anniversary year. The reality of keeping something like Reeltime Pictures going for 40 years, I suppose, must be to keep it interesting too for oneself, Keith. You know, you don't want to be making the same sort of productions in exactly the same kind of way, but for years, never mind, decades, do you? So have you got a good antenna for the next phase of Reeltime Pictures or any of the brands within your brand?
Well, I think I'm at an age now where I'm definitely off in my own universe. So, you know, the people who buy the product that that we make know where I've gone and have decided to go with me, because I think that you get to a point where you can't keep being relevant to everybody. You know, when you're young, you know you're with everything and you're following it. When you get to a certain point in your life, you can't be, as we would have said, hip. And of course, that kind of word is just not relevant now. So whatever you do, you can't help it. You're going to move somewhere which is not in the mainstream. You're going to be moving out into something that where you want to be. There's nothing any of us can do about that. You know, it's like, I suppose an obvious thing to sort of put that in perspective is how Ian Levine would view Doctor Who. He considers black and white classic Doctor Who to be the best Doctor Who ever made, and that's it. Whereas somebody later would view things in a different way, and somebody watching Jodie Whittaker would say that was the best Doctor Who. Everything comes from a perspective with your age. And then passing through that and keeping a business running through that thread and perhaps trying to adapt as much as possible to be interesting to as many people as possible is a trick that's very, very difficult to make. I certainly think that Mythmakers is not a young person's product. You know, it's a product now that mature people watch. If you're going to make something for young people now, it's got to be much, much slicker, much quicker. Some of the products that we make, like Doctor on Display, I think bridge that. I think they're fast, they're furious, they're well made, and they entertain children and adults. You know, I think anybody can enjoy them. But even then, they're still made in a style that is not the way programming is made today. But we can't cross that barrier so much. I think, you know, we have a house style, we have a level of production, a type of production. Maybe if Harry, my son, takes over from me, if he wants to do this kind of thing, he'll bring a different way of making things to it and young person's view in it, or anybody else who may take over Reeltime from me. Reeltime will carry on, and maybe it'll change its style and the way it makes things and what it does. That has to happen anyway. You know, it's the nature of television. Television is changing into much shorter soundbitey kind of television rather than long documentaries and long interview programs. Nobody does the Parkinson style of interview anymore, which is really what I based Mythmakers on. That's a rare thing. Most interviews are now chat shows with multiple guests, and the host is as important as the guest. You know, that's the way television is. I follow my nose. I do what I think is interesting, and so far, luckily enough, people have followed along behind me and thought it was interesting too. I mean, Doctor on Display is a classic. I've always wanted to do a series of videos about the exhibitions. I've always thought that was something that would appeal to fans, and because it appealed to me. And luckily that's proved the case. They have been incredibly successful, and the last one, which is coming out in February, Doctor on Display, the USA tour, I think is probably one of the most fascinating of all of them, because most Doctor Who fans actually here and in America don't know that much about the USA tour. Laurie, the trailer that traveled all around America in 86, 87, 88, and taking a Doctor Who tour around the country. And we finished that. I'm literally just past the final edit with Roger Stevens. And I really think it's good. It's good television. It's not just good home entertainment production. It's good television.
I remember when you came on with Neil Cole a few years ago to talk about the lockdown, the post-lockdown movie that you'd put together, and you were describing Doctor on Display. Then I think you'd filmed some material, but it was sort of in its infancy, and you had hopes of where you might take it. Yeah, and you were sort of, yourself and Neil were sort of bouncing ideas off one another. And I would imagine it was the same with other people. More fellow travelers would have got involved. I'm intrigued by your various transitions into dramatic content as well. Because, Antony, I noticed in broadcast television now it's quite commonplace where we see a format called a docudrama, where we'll have dramatized content intersped with footage of talking heads. Sometimes it's the genuine people involved in said story. Other times it's actors pretending to be those people. Whereas that was also something, do you remember in those releases that when I was picking them up like we just described from specialist shops, and there was it Mary Tam that was being chased around by the March Hare from Alice in Wonderland, and all that. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen at the time. And now that's sort of commonplace too. But I suppose that would be the seeds of the dramatic content that Reeltime would eventually launch as well.
Yeah, I mean, Reeltime Pictures, when it started off and was producing Mythmakers, it was able to do lots of diverse ways of telling the stories of the actors or behind the camera people that were being interviewed. And that was the novelty draw of Mythmakers for me, because it was able to present different stories in different ways. Keith, one thing I remember from very early days of Mythmakers was the Barry Letts and Terence Dicks Mythmakers, because that was in the studio. And again, that looked very different in terms of some of the previous Mythmakers, where we'd seen, like Dana said, Mary Tam outside, being chased by a white rabbit. Each one of those programs were different, but this was a studio-based production. So I'm just curious to know how you shifted from that kind of white rabbit, Mary Tam out on location type story to kind of in the studio with Barry Letts and Terence Dicks. It was a real shift, wasn't it?
It's often, rather than choice, it's often when you're dealing with no budgets. I mean, there's always somebody who has even less money than you, because I'm absolutely sure there are fans out there who think, God, he had enough money to be able to go on location and do some filming, and I wish I could even afford to do that. I'm aware of that. But in terms of making a professional production, we really always were struggling, always, because Mythmakers, Reeltime's output, if you look at it absolutely in a professional budgeting point of view, we've never made a profit. Money has come in, but we've never made a real profit because it's always reinvested, which is fine, because the corporate and business side was always very, very lucrative, and I could afford to subsidize it, building the catalogue. What happened with Barry Letts and Terence Dicks was, again, this organic process of an opportunity coming up. I had been asked by one of my major clients, McDonnell Douglas, to do a series of interviews with personalities and with a presenter. And we got Michael Rodd, some of you may know that name, Tomorrow's World and many other programs, very, very professional interviewer, to come into the studio, which we'd hired for about 3 days, to interview people from McDonnell Douglas, some of their clients, about their work, about their computer solutions, which is what the company was all about. And we had, I say, 3 days to do it in. And I'd already worked out that we'd finish all the interviews by lunchtime on the 3rd day. Luckily, my client, Paul Haynes, who again has become a close lifelong friend, he is a Doctor Who fan. And not only did he help with getting Tom Baker involved in Mythmakers, he also was helping with this, because I had just basically said to him, Paul, look, would you mind if I brought in a couple of people from Doctor Who to be interviewed in the studio after we finish all of your interviews in the afternoon, because we've got a couple of hours free? And he said, yes, of course. And the logic for me was straight away, because we can do 2 people being interviewed in seating with Nick, is to do Barry Letts and Terence Dicks. It was just a no-brainer. It just came straight into my head. And so it was Barry and Terence that we asked, and they immediately said yes. And that was volume 1 of their interviews. The biggest problem is that they had so much to talk about. I think we got about 90 minutes out of them. We ran out of time in the studio, and we had to curtail the interview, and that's why we then had volume 2, which still wasn't long enough. And we always talked about doing volume 3. All of us, Barry, Terence, whenever we used to meet, we'd talk about doing volume 3, and we never got round to it. And when poignant moments in your life, when Barry passed away, and he was a wonderful man, I got a note from Terence saying, well, I guess we'll never do that final Mythmakers.
Oh.
Yeah. Special relationship, those two. Well, 2 absolutely wonderful people, really.
Just thinking about Keith, producers of Doctor Who, the John Nathan Turner Mythmaker, and I think Dylan Reese sort of touches on this in his book, which drew my eye to the John Nathan Turner Mythmaker, because if there was any Mythmaker that needed maybe 2 or 3 volumes, particularly because John's no longer with us, was probably John Nathan Turner. Was there a story around his reluctance? I know Dylan sort of picks up on that John had made some promises before his Mythmaker that he didn't kind of carry through on the particular days. Have I misunderstood that situation, Keith?
No, I think that's fairly accurate. I mean, I've often said, John and I, I think, had a healthy respect for each other. I mean, I can't honestly say that I I can't honestly say I particularly liked John Nathan Turner, but I respected him. You know, and he never, you know, he never really gave me any. He could have made my life hell, and he didn't. So I'm very grateful for that. But you know, he was obstructive while we were trying to get our first drama off the ground. He always believed that we couldn't do it, that we couldn't get enough money together. You know, when it came down to that, giving a rubber stamp for us to do something, it always came to him blocking it. So that's why eventually I went round him to make Wartime. But he didn't bear a grudge. You know, so, you know, I find most people are shades of grey. Very few of us are black and white. And John had his good side and his bad side, you know. And when we came to do his Mythmakers, and I asked him, he said yes, you know, which was really nice. And he said, "Oh, and this is John, you know. Oh, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to reveal everything. I'm going to tell you everything. Oh, it's good." And he got on location and he just buttoned up. He just, you know, Nick tried every trick he could, and he just wasn't going to say anything. You know, and you just sort of think, well, what are you doing this for if you're just going to push it by the numbers? I mean, there's nothing wrong with the interview, but obviously John could have been more, I'm not saying titillating or revealing, but he could have been more honest and said some things that were his real feelings, but he didn't. And that's okay. I wouldn't have, you said the volume 2, volume 3, I totally disagree. I wouldn't have done another volume with him because I'd have got the same, if I may use a rude word, the same shit. You know, it's just the PR, because I think that was John. When it came to it, you were going to get the PR spin and not him being John. One of the very interesting things about Ian Levine's Mythmakers, however contentious that release will be with some fans, and I appreciate, you know, he is very much, as I've used the word, a Marmite character. And that's as much his fault as, you know, as it is anybody's view of him. Ian is not the best diplomat in the world, but he was there. He was part of what went on. And, you know, his view on what happened during those years of the whole office basically falling apart prior to Eric Saywood's leaving, I think is fascinating and valid, you know.
I couldn't agree more. I think his contribution, his particular persona as well, is so unique to Doctor Who. Well, I know Northern Soul sort of claims some of Ian Levine as well, doesn't it? But it's so particular to Doctor Who that it would be criminal if he wasn't represented. That it just seems right that he be there in that organic way that I was speaking about earlier on.
He's just, the problem is, and you know, I'm again someone I've known for 50 years, you know, and I've had my moments with him over things, you know, where I've had to, you know, sort of. But I remember one time I had a conversation with him, and he said, you know, can I do this? And I said no, and he kept saying, and this is Ian, no, but yeah, but, and I said, Ian, I'm going to hang up now, because if I don't hang up, we're going to fall out. And I don't want to fall out with you, so I'm going to hang up here. Yeah, but hour later, the phone rings. Are we still friends? And that's Ian. He can't help it, but that doesn't make it right when he says things that upset people. I mean, he will listen to that from me. He will listen to me when I say to him, you know, you can't do, but he can't stop himself. That isn't right. And I wish he was but you see, the other side of it is, if Ian hadn't have been Ian, we probably wouldn't have 20 or 30 episodes of Doctor Who that we have now. You know, it's only his absolute push nature, never giving up, never taking no for an answer, that made it possible for him to get Doctor Who episodes that were lost. And that is a truth that, you know, we all have to accept, however much at times he really irritates us. And I know that there are some people who've been badly hurt by him, and I accept that, but he still has a voice that I think needs to be heard. one of my most difficult things, being very frank with you both and with everybody out there, was editing his Mythmakers to present everything that he says, but not to veer too much into anything that could be considered litigious. He didn't give us much he didn't give me much in the interview. You know, he was very good with Antony, but there were a few occasions I had to say, this doesn't fit in a Mythmakers. I can't put this in. I knew that there would be pushback on it from people who violently disagree with his views. I don't agree with a lot of his views. But on the other hand, he hasn't attacked me on social media and other platforms. He has done that with other people, and they've done it to him.
I feel Ian respects strength of character.
Yeah.
And I think he can tell when people are bullshitting him. That strength of character that you see in Ian, and probably in others, people that are interview subjects, it does kind of make you, of course, an obvious candidate for the Mythmakers treatment yourself, because you're, earlier on I said your resourcefulness, strength of character, commitment, all of those, you know, the admirable qualities that you would want to take through your life, and the payoff now, as well as sort of being able to provide for a family and all those kinds of things. But the payoff, another payoff, would be to this warm reception, this well of affection that sort of swells up when you hit something as crucial as a 40th anniversary. I think this is thoroughly deserved, and I can't wait to see your Mythmakers, or Neil Cole's, or Ian Levine's, and everything else that you've got coming up as well. But is there anything else you'd like to tease Antony and myself about that we may not know about coming in 2026 and beyond?
I don't know whether you deserve a bit of teasing.
That's what she said.
Yes, true. Well, I mean, I know that I'm going to wind it down a little bit over the next year or so, because Anastasia and I have some programs that we need to finish for the Greek world. We do Greek language documentaries and dramas and programming and films for Cyprus and Greece, and we've got a couple of things coming up which we have to finish. So I'm going to take a bit of time and out to work with her on that. She's been incredibly understanding of my passion and my obsessions, but I owe her, so we're going to go and get those done. And it's good sometimes to have a break, you know, to recharge the batteries. So Mythmakers will sort of just calm down for a little while. They'll be coming out, but not as many as have been coming out, because of course one of the reasons we were releasing so many over the last few years was to get all of the ones done that we needed to complete the Doctors, to complete that mammoth set of compilation DVDs of Mythmakers that, you know, I'm very proud of. It's like a part work of my life.
Yeah,
brilliant. So pleased that we managed to be able to do that and to complete them. A little bit of shooting yourself in the foot, because it's taken people a while to realize or believe that we won't be doing that in the future with the ones we're releasing now. You know, a little bit I think, well, just wait, because he's going to do it. I know he's going to do it. And I'm not. We cannot afford to do it. I've tried to explain in the nicest possible way that you cannot now produce the right quantity of bulk duplicated DVDs of this kind of product and sell enough to make them pay for themselves. Just can't do it anymore. You know, the sales figures were going down as we got to the last few. We just managed to do it. They're finished. From now on, Mythmakers will be single Mythmakers, and they'll be available as DVDs as long as people want them, but download and stream is obviously going to be the long-term future. In terms of other projects, there's a few we want to do. I'm working at the moment on another potential, nothing's signed and we haven't agreed it yet, on doing finishing off some episodes of a series that was made called Ghostlands, which you guys might have heard of, which had Sylvester and Jacqueline Pierce. Matthew Waterhouse was in it. The guy that made them, and I can't remember his name right now, and that's terrible of me, he made a pilot and shot about 3 episodes worth, but didn't finish the last 2 episodes. So we're talking about getting those last 2 episodes completed and releasing them as a package, but may not happen. I hope it does, because it's actually incredibly good drama. So we'll see how we go. Talking to, and this is a bit of a passion one, somebody I knew, but I didn't know well. He was part of the group of people that were a little bit peripheral to me, Kevin Davis's friends and Stephen Mansfield, a gentleman called Tony Luke, who worked on an animated concept for a series called Archangel Thunderbird. It was a little bit connected with Chris Leach, who did Star Watch. They were all involved in this together, and they made a pilot episode, and which was completed. And Kevin Davis did the live action directing, and it was edited and made, but it never made it into a series. It was shown on Sci-Fi Channel, but he tragically died very young, I think in his 40s. What I'm going to do, I hope, I've got to go and see his family who live up in near Newcastle. Kevin's put me in touch with them, and I'm going to go and have a sit down chat with them and see what they think, and basically tell them what we can achieve with what finances we have. But I'm hoping that we'll be releasing Archangel Thunderbird with a behind the scenes documentary, again explaining Tony's life and what he managed to achieve, and what he was interested in. So that's another one of those archive projects that I enjoy so much. We want to do a final sort of American production. I'm waiting to hear from a friend in America who's been so good at supporting me the last couple of years. There's a possibility that a PBS station in America may do a pledge drive again, and I may be able to go and film that as a overall package to explain pledge drives in America and PBS television, and how PBS television was funded for Doctor Who. And we'll be calling that, if we can do it, we'll be calling that Doctor in Need. So that's another one that's in the long-term pipe. Obviously, from a drama point of view, I still want to finish Anomaly. I've got Mind Game Requiem that I really want to get done. And I have the rights to do something as a sequel to The Stones of Blood, which working title is Blood of the Stones. But, that's 10 years if I live that long, to try and get all these projects completed.
I absolutely loved Downtime and Sill and the Devil Seeds of Arador 2.
When Sill was finished, one of probably the greatest compliments you could ever hope for is that the writer loved it. Given that he'd written for Doctor Who, and he wrote Gangsters, for God's sake. He saw the premiere and just came up to me afterwards and said, "I can't believe you've done such a good production, knowing the limitations you were working in." I'm very proud of it. I think it's the best thing I've made. I really think it's almost faultless. Admittedly, you don't have a big budget, and that's obvious, but that doesn't really matter with this particular production, because it is such a confined. Phil Newman did such a great job with the sets, all of the crew were absolutely brilliant. Rob Thrush, the camera work, everything, very, very. And the acting, I'm faultless throughout. Really, really pleased. Good casting. I'm
tremendous fun, Keith, and so authentic to the spirit, the flavour of classic Doctor Who.
Exactly, but still moving forward, like Downtime moved forward from classic Who. So did Sill. Sill was, you're absolutely right. It was from my point of view, it was a homage to classic Doctor Who, but taking it forward with a slightly different style of production to make it seem a bit more modern, rather than just something stuck in the 80s. Things like this, you can't go out for backing from major corporations and major investors, because you're never going to get the money back. You simply won't sell this kind of product in a wide enough capacity to be able to make the money back, to make it with a big budget. So you have to make it with a finite budget. That's just reality. For example, Downtime still hasn't broken even. And that was the most expensive Doctor Who spin-off ever made. I can't afford to subsidize the productions I make to that degree. Ian Levine and DSL, Andrew Beach, DSL, and I funded, Reeltime funded Downtime. Otherwise, we couldn't have made it on our own. And it will always probably be the most expensive independent production ever made. Seal was a lot cheaper, a lot more focused.
When I look back, Antony, to Wartime, which I also picked up from a specialist at Sci-Fi Shop in the mid to late 80s, I had no idea what to expect. Doctor Who that wasn't Doctor Who, that I had to pay for? All those things, when I was a teenager. What is this? And yet, it was very unsettling, very uneasy. And I knew I was watching something that was exciting. Back then, I wasn't even that sure who Sergeant Benton was, because I hadn't really seen any of the early 70s stories. But this had something of that quality about it, some of that flavour, which absolutely does seem to survive in real-time productions to this very day.
I know. Keith, I really enjoyed your Mythmaker, as I said, and there were lots of new bits of information that I didn't know about your life and about the time that working on Mythmakers, the first ever panopticon. But I think one question that wasn't asked for me, which I feel I should ask this evening, is, do you still watch Doctor Who today? Do you still like it as much as you did? And if you could change any bits of new Doctor Who, what would they be?
Oh God, that's just dropping a bomb into the conversation, isn't it? Okay. Being as honest as I possibly can be, because I obviously have to also be a diplomat. Some of it I like. I don't get the same buzz that I used to get when I was younger. I mean, and I think that's not necessarily the program. It's simply that I'm of a different age. I mean, I remember a while ago, we were on location filming, and I don't know who it was. I think it was David Howe actually said, "I've got to get back to watch Doctor Who." By this time, we all had VHS recorders or whatever. And I said, "But you can record it and watch it later." And he went, "No, I have to be there at 6 o'clock to watch Doctor Who." And I realized that just wasn't me. I don't mind when I watch it. That doesn't bother me. But for some people, being there at the time it's shown on TV at that moment is part of the magic for them. I mean, I think nothing could ever match watching John Pertwee live the first time, those episodes, and Tom Baker's ones. For me, they were the height of Doctor Who, but that is because of me and my age. I think it's wrong to compare too much. I will say, in my opinion, and I still fully support the show because I think there's always a future for it. There will be, but for me, what it's lost is its magic. Over the last few years, it's lost the wanderlust. It's become too looking at itself and parodying itself and needing to preach rather than telling a damn good story and just being. If that makes any sense to either of you. But I don't think I have a right to criticize, because I know how difficult it is to make television. Trust me, I know. It doesn't matter how much money you've got. I think I might have disagreements or my own views on how it should be made, but it would be wrong because I am not making television today. And television today has to be made in a certain way. I love Strange New Worlds. The Star Trek series, Strange New Worlds. I absolutely adore it. Other people don't. I think it carries the ethos of the original series forward. And if I was going to make a comparison, I would like to see Doctor Who made in a similar way, without thanks, mate. Without parodying itself and without taking itself so damn seriously. And I'll throw one other thing into it, which is a bit contentious. everybody who writes for Doctor Who brings their own views and their own stories to Doctor Who, because that's what you want. But I am fed up with people carrying their own torches into the program and eclipsing the program itself with their own views. And I'd leave it at that.
Thank you. Keith, Mythmakers is a catalogue of archive material. Some people from in front of the camera, some people behind the camera. But of all the people that you've interviewed, I'd like to focus on the people that you've never interviewed. So Keith, if you had a chance and a magic wand to bring any of those people back, or anybody that's still with us that you haven't interviewed, who would that be?
I think the answers are fairly self-evident in many ways. I mean, I would love to believe that we'll get a chance to interview Peter Davison and Lala Ward. You know, and I'm really hoping that we'll be able to interview Maureen O'Brien soon. Cool. Going back, I mean, obviously the list is pretty endless. I mean, if you said pick a person to interview that you haven't met, obviously William Hartnell. It goes without saying. I've been lucky enough to meet virtually everybody else. I never obviously met William, although I met Heather, his wife, at the second convention, and we had lots of long conversations about him. And I'd love to have met Roger Delgado. Love to have met him. I think that would have been I really know I would have just enjoyed that so much. But there are so many people in life that you wish you could have met that you'd never get that chance. And I met Verity Lambert. How lucky was I? You know, I think anybody in my position would be churlish to say they haven't had a charmed and lucky life. And I'm just very grateful that I've had those opportunities.
Beautiful answers. I was quite moved by that.
It's true. It's true, isn't it? You know.
Oh,
you know, and I think it's the worst thing in the world if you're going to be bitter about anything when you've been so lucky in your life. I'm waiting for it all to go tits up. You
know? Waiting to get discovered.
Yeah, waiting for something to go wrong. You know, but no, I'm joking. Yeah.
The Reeltime Pictures back catalogue of content is available through its own platform, Time Travel TV, a repository of all those productions and those which you're curating for others, an unequaled selection of productions documenting the entire history of classic Doctor Who and so much of the cultural impact too. I feel it's immensely significant and of value. telos.co.uk. That's the place to go to order the anniversary book, Doctor Who Myths and Legends, the Reeltime Pictures story. That's by Dylan Rees, available now in print and as an ebook. Congratulations again, Keith, and everyone who's been a part of Reeltime's extraordinary success. Through thick and through thin, a lot of people are going to find your story inspirational, I know. And from our point of view, Keith, it's just always great to catch up with you, to spend a bit of time, have a few laughs, and to see what further gems we can tease from your memory. So thank you for that as well.
Pleasure, always.
There's the gurgling and the rumbling, calling time on another conversation. But there's more on the way soon enough. Look out for that, wherever it was you found this. Maybe our dedicated home feed, that's type40.podbean.com. We're across all major podcatchers, Spotify, Audible, Amazon Music, Apple, all those places and lots more. See us as well as hear us on our YouTube and Rumble channels with enhanced video editions of every show. And there's exclusive extra videos and live streams too. Not forgetting our mothership, the Fandom Podcast Network's master feed. Please consider a trip sideways in time there for more quality, practically daily shows from the FPN. Make contact through our social medias. Have your say on all of this and that. Instagram and X at Type40 Doctor Who. Email us, type40doctorwho@outlook.com. And there's still the Type 40 Facebook group too. Of course there is thousands of other Doctor Who fans from all over the world, maybe a few other worlds too. Rants and raves, discussions and debates, issues of the moment or the ongoing storms. It's all on the wall there at the Type 40 Facebook group. Get stuck in with fellow fans and companions. Off again, and we're off now too. Thank you so much for your time, Antony and Keith. What a great conversation. What a fabulous 40 years here of real-time pictures, of myth makers, and everything else that's gone on before it. I'm going to go back. I think I'm going to rewatch some of those classic interviews and dramas that we've recounted on this show, Antony. It's been a real blast from the past, hasn't it? From all our pasts.
Yeah, and it's a real tribute to the collection, isn't it? That, you know, we still do keep going back to editions of Mythmakers to rewatch them. You know, I probably, Keith, wore out the tape of the John Pertwee Mythmakers when I first got it. You know, played it over and over and over again. So it's a lovely trip down memory lane, but it's also an incredible catalogue. So if somebody hasn't entered the world of the Mythmakers, I suggest that you start soon, because there is an incredible journey ahead of you.
All available to watch, and they can reach out to you too as well, can't they, Keith? You're very active on social media, lots of different platforms, as well as Time Travel TV. So why don't you give them the links now? Give them a rundown of all the places they can find you.
Well, usually in the pub about 6 o'clock, or down at the local curry shop. But I'm not going to tell you where they are. The best place to get me is on Messenger or via Facebook. That's always the easiest place to get hold of me. If anybody needs to ask me any questions, I'll always try to keep in touch with everybody. But I will always say, just bear in mind that, you know, it can be too difficult for me to be able to maintain an ongoing conversation. It's not that I don't want to, I just haven't got the time to give everybody individual attention that I would like to. Otherwise I wouldn't do anything.
What's coming in the next 40 years? That's, I think, what we're all wondering, Keith. You know, so many more Doctor Who figures, I think, that you'll manage to locate here and there. There must be a hit list somewhere.
Well, I'll tell you, if you're expecting me to live to 107, then that's great, because I'll be really pleased.
In some ways, I'd like to know who you've got on your list of possible viable targets. But in many ways, I don't want to know. I'm happy to be delighted to monitor the social medias and see who pops up next. But thank you for popping up and popping in again, back to Type 40 after a few years now. I just hope it's not quite so long the next time. God, I've already thanked you, haven't I? I'd already thanked you, Antony.
Yeah, I'll take it twice.
It's all falling apart now, everybody. This is the truth. You're here. He's going to cut all this out now. He's not going to show this. He won't show what
a dare.
Useless 30 years.
Is that a dare, Barnfather? We always have the time if you have the space here at Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast. Take care. Speak soon. Bye-bye.